This video is brought to you by Nate Productions. Hello everyone and welcome back to another tutorial. During this tutorial we'll be discussing how to create movement in your 3D game. So in order to create our movement we're going to be needing a couple things, and I've prepared all these before we start the video. So I created a plane which is essentially the floor for our game. We have the material. I've attached the material kind of greenish to look like grass. I also created a player which is just a sphere for now, and I've attached a sphere collider and the rigid body which is going to be used for our movement. Rigid bodies do a lot of things including physics and gravity, amongst those things, and we're going to be using that to move our game object which is our player. And in order to capture the input we're going to be using the input class, which is essentially the original way of capturing input, and we're going to be using the horizontal axis and the vertical axis available in the input manager. There is our arrow already created for us, and essentially the horizontal is for going left and right, and these are bound to left or A buttons for the alternative. So if you want to go left, you either press the left arrow or the A, or the right button and the D. And you can see that the negative button is bound to the left or the A, and the positive is bound to the right and D. And vice versa for the vertical, we're going up and down essentially, or front and back, and the negative button is down or S alternatively, or the positive, the up and W. Okay, so let's go to our script. I've created a movement 3D script, and let's open that up. And very simple script, again, not a lot of lines of code. We're going to be using two different variables, one being the rigid body, which is going to be capturing a reference from our player for the rigid body component in order to change the velocity of this component, and also the speed, which allows us to specify how fast or slow our player will be going. And in order to get the component from our player, we need to just get component and specify the component that we're trying to get. We also instantiate the speed to 10, and this is a float, as you can remember, this is just a number. And in the update function, which is called every frame, we're going to be getting the input in a vector2. So as we said, we have two axes to get a hold of. One is going to be used for the X and one for the Z. We're not going to be messing with the Y, as we do not want the player to be going upwards like this. We're just going to go left or right and back and forth like this. Okay, so we're creating a vector2, which are essentially two float numbers, and we're going to give these values of the X for the horizontal and the Y for the vector of the vertical, and each one returns a float, which is going to be either a -1, a 0, or a 1, depending on what button is pressed or not pressed for both of these axes. And then we're going to be accessing these axes on the line below. So we're going to be overriding the velocity of our game object and our rigid body with a new vector3, which is essentially, the vector3 is due to the fact that we have 3 dimensions to take into account for, as this is a 3D game, but we only want to change the 2 values, so we don't want to change the Y as we said. So for the X, we're going to be using the input X, so the first value of the vector that we just created, and multiplying this by speed. And the same for the Z axis of the velocity, but we're going to be using the Y for the input, as this is the second element in the vector. So this is the X and this is the Y for the vector2. We're accessing the X and Y, but it's important to note that for the vector3 here, the input Y is used in the Z axis instead, as we have a third dimension here that we do not want to change. So again, this will be either -1, 0, or 1. If it's 0, so no buttons are pressed, or both are pressed, this will be 0, so it will essentially nullify the value in the X. Same for the Y. If the positive value is pressed, it will move to the positive direction. If the negative button is pressed, it will move to the negative direction. So let's run this very quickly and see our result. So running this, you can see that I am moving as we expect. We can move diagonally like this. So perfect, we have a script working. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you during the next time. Goodbye. Want to become a professional game developer? I designed the ultimate game development course that will teach you everything you need to make your own top quality games with over 20 hours of content and 100 lectures at your disposal. Make sure to check the link in the description for more information.